The Garbage King by Elizabeth Laird, Chapter 5. In spite of the desperate lack of food and his constant gnawing hunger, Mamo was growing. He was hardly aware of it. He only knew that his voice was playing tricks on him and that his hands and feet had become more clumsy. He had lost count of the weeks and months that had passed since the man in the city clothes had brought him here. He had given up all thoughts of escaping. The farmer, whose sudden rages were never far away, was becoming more tense as harvest time approached. A freak storm had wrecked the crops in a neighbouring district, and as his own fields began to ripen, he lived in dread that the same thing would happen to him. The black cow, too, the awkward one who always got herself into trouble, was in calf, and the farmer inspected her suspiciously every evening, shooting angry glances at Mamo if he found so much as a burr sticking to her hide. On Sundays, the stifling everyday routine changed a little. Tesfaye didn't go to school, and the family set off early in the morning, before it was light, to walk several miles to the nearest church, where the service started soon after dawn. For Mamo, this meant that he missed his breakfast, though the woman sometimes put a piece of sugar cane into his hand before hurrying after her family with the baby on her back. The worst thing was that Tesfaye would run home ahead of the others along the path by the stream. The sight of Mamo sitting together with Hailu and Johannes always seemed to inflame him to a jealous rage. "Where's your pride?" he said jeeringly to them. "What do you want to talk to that dirty beggar for? Don't you know you can catch diseases off people like that?" Mamo usually looked out for Tesfaye on a Sunday and moved away from the other two when he saw the boy's lithe figure appear on the hillside above the stream. One bright Sunday morning, everyone had been in a better mood than usual. The farmer had actually smiled as Mamo led the cows out of the hut. "She'll calve any day now," he grunted, feeling the black cow's swollen flanks. "It'll be a big one by the look of it." Then he gone to the gate and looked out over his few small fields. "They'll be ready to harvest by the end of next week. Then you'll know what hard work really means." His tone had been almost friendly. It had lulled Mamo into the faint feeling of optimism. Maybe Johannes' father was right, he thought. Maybe things will be better once the harvest's in. As he followed the cows down the warm path, he suddenly remembered one of the tunes he'd often heard blaring out from the music shop in Addis Ababa. He'd spent hours sitting on the wall near it, listening. He could even just remember the sounds of some of the words, or near enough, though he didn't have any idea of their meaning. "We're the survivors. Yes, the black survivors." He was still crooning softly to himself when he joined the other boys. "What's that song? What are you singing?" Johannes said at once. "Is it from Addis? Did you hear it on the TV?" Even Hailu looked interested and asked him to sing it again. The morning passed much more quickly than usual. Mamo discovered, once he tried to think about it, that he'd learned the tunes of 6 or 7 songs and could repeat a good many words. The 3 boys perched on the roots of an ancient tree from which they could look down on the cattle, who were moving slowly upstream, seeking out the last few patches of greenery. For the first time in months, Mamo felt almost happy. The music made him feel different, powerful somehow, and hopeful. In Addis, he'd only ever sung quietly under his breath, afraid of drawing attention to himself, but here he could let his voice swoop and soar. It belled out into the vast silence of the countryside, clear and true. He hadn't known he could sing like that. It felt good. He couldn't help responding to the wholehearted admiration in Johannes' eyes, and the respect in Hailu's. He was so absorbed that he forgot to keep an eye on the shadows, which always shortened rapidly as the morning wore on. Normally they gave him an idea of the time, so that he could be ready to slip away from the others the moment Tesfaye appeared. Today he didn't give Tesfaye a single thought until a stone whizzed past his ear. He jumped and looked round, instinctively putting an arm up to shield his head. Tesfaye was pelting down the slope towards him, another stone in his hand. Johannes and Hailu stood up, looked nervously at each other and backed away. "Cockroach! Rat!" yelled Tesfaye, hurling another stone, which grazed Mamo's shoulder. "Why aren't you looking after my cows? Who says you can sit here all day singing dirty foreign songs from your mother's slag shop bar?" The blood rushed to Mamo's head. His fist tightened round his stick. He was gearing himself to rush at Tesfaye when Hailu let out a yell. "The cows! Look!" The second stone that Tesfaye had thrown had rolled down the hill and hit the black cow's forelock. She had started back nervously, frightening the others who were trampling about at the edge of the stream. Hilo and Johannes raced down towards them, holding out their sticks, trying to reach each of their cows in turn to soothe them and guide them away, and Mamo, fear of the farmer overcoming his fury, followed them automatically. His head still in turmoil, he missed his footing and fell headlong, grazing the skin off both his knees. His stick flew out of his hand. It hit the normally quiet brown cow who was standing behind the black one, and who now lurched forwards, butting the black cow's rump with her horns. The black cow, nervous as usual, rolled her eyes and arched her back, then sidestepped, and Mamo could only watch in silent horror as she lost her footing and fell sideways down the bank, landing with a drenching splash in the stream. Frozen, he waited for her to scramble to her feet again, but she didn't move. She lay in the water, her huge belly bulging grotesquely, opened her mouth and began to bellow with agonised, uncow-like intensity. "Look what you've done! Look!" screamed Tesfaye, as much fear as anger in his voice as he jumped over Mamo with a flying leap and plunged into the stream. "Come and help me! We've got to get her up!" Mamo staggered to his feet, hardly feeling the pain in his knees, not noticing the blood dripping down his shins. Tesfaye was trying to lever the cow up, pushing at her with all his strength. Mamo joined him and they heaved and strained against her, ignoring her anguished bellows. She didn't help them. She lay like a dead weight, her legs kicking feebly. "Come on, you! Push!" Tesfaye was shouting, "Get her up!" It was no good. The cow had stopped bellowing and her head had fallen back into the water. As Mamo watched, her tongue flopped out of her mouth, her eyes stopped rolling, and death began to glaze over them. There was a shout from above and the farmer came running down the path. "What's happened? What are you doing? Get her out!" he yelled. Then he took in the animal's unmistakable stillness, and with a howl, he lifted his stick and advanced on Mamo. It was all his fault, father," Mamo heard Tesfaye say in a rapid, high-pitched voice. He threw a stone at me and scared her, and then he threw his stick at her." "Liar! Liar!" screamed Mamo. "Mamo's right. Tesfaye threw a stone first," Mamo heard Johannes say indignantly, but no one took any notice. The rage in Mamo's head was so hot that he hardly felt the farmer's first blows. He was struggling to get past him, to reach Tesfaye, to stuff his lies down his throat and make him grovel to his father. But the stick was falling on him so fast and so cruelly that he could only think of protecting himself, of carrying his head and trying to run away. He didn't manage to take a step. The man knocked him to the ground. "You dog, you filthy animal, I'll kill you!" The man was shouting wildly as the stick struck brutally again and again, raining blows on his arms and legs, thwacking against his back, his head and his face. Then, with a crack as loud as a gunshot, the stick snapped in half. It seemed to enrage the farmer even more. He flung the two ends aside, grabbed Mamo by the shoulders and, dragging him to the stream, plunged his head under the water. "He's going to drown me. Oh God, help me. Oh God, don't let me die," was Mamo's last thought. Then everything was wiped from his mind as he fought to hold his breath. He was about to burst, about to give up and allow the water to enter his lungs and drown him, when his head was suddenly released. He came up spluttering and was flung backwards onto the bank. As he struggled for breath, every part of his body throbbed with pain, and he felt as if he would faint. He sat woozily on the ground, his head down on his knees, only dimly aware of the confused noises all around, the receding footfalls of the cattle as they were driven away, and the subdued retreating voices of Hilo and Johannes. After a long time, he lifted his head, wincing at the pain across his shoulders. He looked round cautiously. Everyone had gone. He was alone. A dreadful desolation entered his heart. "I can't go on," he thought. He had a strange feeling that his soul was coming loose from his body. "If it comes right off," he thought, "and floats away, where will it go?" He saw in his mind's eye a picture of God, like one of the frescoes he had seen in a church in Addis Ababa. God looked like an old father, with his arms open and a loving smile on his face. Maybe it would be like going home, he thought, to a family. He looked up at the sky. The blue immensity seemed to swirl around his head, but the light sent jagged darts into his eyes, making his head ache even more painfully. He looked down again and noticed that the strength was beginning to seep back into his arms and legs. "No," he said out loud. "Please, God, don't do this. Take my soul." But it was too late. His body was taking charge again, drawing his soul back in like a child pulling on the string of a balloon. Mamo suddenly felt violently angry. For a moment, escape seemed to have been within his grasp, and now it had been snatched away. And then, in his head, he heard Tesfay's voice again, from that very first day when they had taken the cattle out together. "That sort of plant's poisonous," Tesfay had said. "You better watch it, city boy." Mamo had kept an eye out after that for the occasional clump of poisonous plants, and he knew where the nearest one was right now. It was growing luxuriantly down by the stream, near the place where the dead cow still lay. He had helped Hilo and Johannes to hack it down several times, but it kept putting up fresh shoots. He didn't wait for second thoughts. He stood up, shakily, and hobbled down to the water's edge. He picked a clutch of the new leaves, which were sprouting obstinately from the plant's deep roots, and stuffed them into his mouth. "Take me, be my father, take me away." The words ran round inside his head like a drumbeat. The leaves tasted so bitter that, against his will, he almost spat them out again. Instead, he scooped up water from the stream in his cupped hands and drank, swilling them down. Now, he whispered, waiting to feel once again the delicious lightness as his soul drifted away from him, hoping to see the father with open arms. Instead, he felt a horrible trembling sensation begin to shake him, and a cloudy mushiness invaded his mind. Before he fainted, his last thought was, "I shouldn't have done that." And then the flicker of a flame in a dying fire. No, I want to live." The morning his mother flew away to England, it felt to Danny as if the bottom had dropped out of his world. Numb with misery, he had hung around her room while Zenny turned out drawers and cupboards, packing clothes and shoes and medicines into a huge suitcase, and Miss Watson hovered by Ruth's bed, checking her pulse from time to time and looking over the injections and pills in her small black bag. "You're going to come back soon, aren't you, Mama?" he whispered to her, sidling up to her bed. "You're not going to die over there." She turned her head wearily towards him, and he was shocked at how ill she looked. Why hadn't he noticed the dark shadows round her eyes and the grey tinge to her lips? "No, I'll be all right. Work hard, darling. Try to please Baba. Be nice to Messeret." Then Miss Watson had shooed him out of the room. The very worst moment of his life so far was when Negessi had limped out to open the compound gates in the car, with his mother, his father, and the nurse inside it, had swept out into the street and disappeared. He had to fight hard to hold back the tears. He tried to follow in his mind the car's route to the airport. Now it would be turning out onto the main road. It would have stopped at the traffic lights. It would be going round Mescal Square. It would be going under the arch now, turning onto the airport road. How long would it be before father came back alone? 2 hours? 3? And what would happen then? He went back into his room and sat down on his bed, not knowing what to do. The everyday sounds of the house were all around him. He could hear the splashing of the hose which Negessi had brought out to water the flowers. In the street outside, a vegetable seller was passing by, calling out his wares. Messeret's voice came from the room next door. She was singing softly in a monotonous drone as she played a babyish game. He could hear Zenny too. She was talking to the cook. They were walking round the side of the house, approaching his window. "What do you think?" Zenny was saying. "Is she going to make it? She's looked so sick, poor lady." The cook cleared his throat and spat. "Not much of a chance. She's got that look my mother-in-law had before she passed away, God rest her. How is she going to survive that journey? And that English nurse was only a girl. What good can she do?" Zenny gave a sharp sigh. "Suppose you're right. There'll be changes around here then. I'll be looking for a new job for a start. She was so sweet. It was her that kept me here. Don't fancy working just for him, I can tell you. He terrifies the life out of me." They moved on and their voices faded round the far side of the house. Danny sat still on his bed, staring at the wall, trying not to think. At last he heard the familiar rattle of the metal gates and Atto Paulus's firm tread as he strode into the house. Danny braced himself, hoping that his father would walk past his door and go on down the corridor to his room, or that Messeret would come running out to hug him and distract his attention. But the footsteps stopped, the handle of his door turned, and Atto Paulus marched into his room. He stood looking down at Danny, the usual frown on his face. "Well, And what do you expect me to do with you? His voice was softer than usual. He sounded genuinely puzzled. I don't know, Father, Danny said, trying to fill the silence. I've tried everything I can think of. Threats, bribes, punishments, nothing works. Danny looked sightlessly at the floor. It's impossible to deal with you here, Atopoulos went on, looking with irritation at the mess on Danny's desk and the clutter of old toys and drawings beside his bed. It's too soft, too easy. There really is no alternative. A cold feeling was settling in Danny's stomach. No alternative to what, Father? I called Faisal today, Atopoulos said. His eyes didn't meet Danny's. He was staring at a stain on the wooden floor. He's coming to fetch you tomorrow. Danny felt the blood drain from his face. No, Father, you said only if I failed the exams. The results aren't even out yet. His father reached down into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a slip of paper. They came today. You scraped through a couple, did well in Amharic, I grant you, but the rest, hopeless, appalling. For once his voice was sad rather than angry. It pierced Danny like a bayonet. I'll try again. They'll let me resit them, I promise. I'll work harder. No. Atopoulos stood up. I've been too soft for too long. When I make a threat, I carry it out. I've already written to the school withdrawing you. A year of proper discipline with Faisal. A year? I'll visit you from time to time. You'll be looked after, but there'll be no more nonsense. No mooning about daydreaming, making up silly stories, a proper regime of work. I can't, Father. Please don't send me away. I can't. Danny's voice was barely audible. His father came over to the bed, dropped a hand on his shoulder and shook it lightly. It won't be that bad. There's no need to make a fuss about it. Faisal's strict, but he's fair, and he'll make a man of you. Please believe me, Danny. I didn't want to do this, but I really think it's for the best. You'll thank me one day. Danny hardly noticed him leave. He jumped off his bed and stood in the middle of the room, his knees shaking and his head light with fright. There were lions in the countryside all around Jajiga, and ferocious bandits armed with Kalashnikovs. A boy at school had heard someone talk about it. It was blisteringly hot and the food was awful, and there were scorpions in the houses. But even the lions and bandits and scorpions would be bearable if he didn't have to deal with Faisal. Faisal would bully and terrorise him. Faisal would mock him and hold him up to everyone else's ridicule. He would rather die than live with Faisal. He would rather run away. Run away? That's what I'll do, he thought. I'll go to Auntie to say hi. No, Father would find out and make her send me back. I'll find someone else to stay with. Not Atto Mesfin. He'd say I had to go home. Someone in my class at school. Someone from my old school. Anyone. That nice waiter at the Hilton. Someone will take me in. It would only be for a while till Mama comes home. He swallowed, trying not to think about what would happen if she never came back at all. An idea suddenly came to him. Georges, that quiet boy in my primary school. We used to do really nice things together, and he doesn't live with his parents, just his uncle. An uncle who wouldn't bother about me or get in touch with Father. I went to Georges' house once. I can sort of remember where it is. That's it. I'll go to Georges'. He was pulling things out of drawers already, making a pile on his bed. I'll need clothes and stuff, and some spare shoes, and the money Mama gave me. I've got 50 birr at least. The door behind him opened suddenly, making him jump. What are you doing? Atopoulos said. Packing? Danny said nervously. A rare smile crossed Atopoulos' face. Good, he said, trying to hide his surprise. Good boy. He hesitated. I have to go to the office now. Faisal's arriving tonight. I'll see you both off in the morning. He was about to close the door. Father, Danny said urgently. Yeah? About Mama, is she going to be all right? Atopoulos frowned. Yes, of course she is. That's why I've sent her off to London. When's she coming home? As soon as she's well enough. Not long. I don't know. He went out and closed the door. He doesn't believe that, thought Danny. He knows she's going to die. He just won't say so. He heard his father leave and the gates clang shut behind him. His heart was pounding and his palms were sweating. If I'm going to go, he thought, I've got to go now, before he gets home and Faisal arrives. He pulled an old sports bag off the top of the cupboard in the corner of his room and stuffed his clothes into it. Then picked up his blue baseball cap and rammed it on his head. He looked around one last time and his eye fell on the desk. Should he leave a note? Tried to explain? What was there to say? He opened the door a crack and looked out. Messeret had wandered round to the back of the house in search of Zenny. He could hear her funny little voice raised in excitement as she tried to explain something. He wanted suddenly to go after her, to pick her up and give her a cuddle. Instead, he turned the other way towards the front door. It was open. In the harsh sunlight outside, he could see the little kiosk where Negesi slept beside the big gates. He could tell it was empty. Negesi must have gone round to the kitchen too, or perhaps he was sleeping under the big tree at the side of the house, making the most of his employer's absence. This was his chance then. It was now or never. Danny stood for a long moment, hesitating, painfully breathing in the familiar smells of home, the faint whiff of his mother's perfume, the sharpness of onions frying in the kitchen, the slight mustiness of the old brown rugs. Then he crept down the front steps and, his bag bumping clumsily against his knees, raced across to the gates. He opened them as quietly as he could and was suddenly outside in the lane, alone. Milk dribbling into his bruised mouth made Mamo choke. He opened his eyes. The face bending over him seemed a long way away, then very near. Then it broke into shimmering fragments. He closed his eyes again. He heard Johannes say, "There's still some of that stuff in his mouth, father, look." Someone pulled down his lower jaw and he felt a finger hook around the last of the leaves which were clinging to his tongue. Then a man's voice, which was somehow familiar, said, "Lift his head, gently. We must get more milk inside him." He didn't choke this time. He let the warm fluid trickle into his mouth and swallowed. "Good," the man said. "Help me lift him onto my back, Johannes." As they moved him, Mamo fainted again. When he opened his eyes, he was lying on a cowskin in a strange house. Light from the setting sun shone through the open door, hurting his eyes. A woman was squatting near the fire that burned cheerfully in the middle of the room, with a couple of small children at her feet. From outside he could hear a furious voice. "You've no right, he's mine. Good money I paid for him, and all he's done is lose me my best cow." It was the farmer. A shiver ran through Mamo. He shrank back from the light against the curved wall of the roundhouse. The movement sent a wave of nausea through his stomach. He closed his eyes again and lay still. "I know, neighbour, I'm sorry." Johannes' father was speaking softly, soothingly, trying to calm the farmer down. "But what could I do? I thought he was going to die. He still might." "Eating poisonous leaves, I don't believe it," the farmer spat angrily. "I'm warning you, he's a crafty one. You're so soft you believe anything of anybody. He's just trying to get sympathy and escape his punishment." "I thought you punished him already," Johannes' father said dryly. "His face is so battered he can barely see out of his eyes. It'll be a while before he can walk again, even when he's flushed out all the poison." The farmer growled out something which Mamo couldn't hear. "I'll tell you what," Johannes' father said pleasantly. "Let him stay with me for a while, till he's on the mend. I owe you a favour after you brought that barley back from the market for me last month. As soon as he's back on his feet and can work again, I'll send him back to you." "On his feet?" exploded the farmer. "He'll be on his feet in the morning if he knows what's good for him." "Oh, I don't think so," Johannes' father said. "Come and look at him yourself." Mamo heard their feet cross the beaten earth floor towards him. He lay still, his eyes closed, too weak and shaky to dare open them, not sure if he would faint again. The farmer drew in his breath. "Well, what would you have done?" he said defensively. "He destroyed my best cow. He's useless, I tell you. I wish I'd never set eyes on him." "Well, then leave him here," Johannes' father said. Their voices were retreating as they went outside again. "I'll look after him." Mamo felt a rustle of clothes beside him and managed to look up. The woman had come over to him. She had pulled a low stool across and was sitting beside his cowskin mat, holding a glass of milk out to him. "Drink it," she said quite kindly. "It will stop the poison harming you. Sip it. Slowly does it. I'll hold your head up if you like. That's better. You silly boy, what did you do such a thing for?" Something seemed to give way inside Mamo. Something loosened. Tears edged through between his swollen eyelids and ran down beside his cheeks. He turned his head away from her and sobs racked his chest. For the next few days, he hovered between sleep and wakefulness, between despair and a faint rebirth of hope. At first he could barely move. Convulsions of shivering, and bouts of sickness would overcome him, and each painful bruise protested every time he stirred. But suddenly, on the third day, he felt like life flowed back into him, a new life, different from the old one. And if he had really died and come back to earth again as another person, and he was overcome by a strange euphoria, as if he had entered an enchanted world of happiness. For the first time in his life, he felt surrounded by love. Johannes' mother fed him and washed his cuts. She talked to him gently, asking him about his mother and Tigist. When she went to fetch water, she left him to mind the babies, to call out to them if they went too near the fire. And when she came back, she smiled and thanked him. The best time was in the evening, when Johannes, full of the day's events, had brought the cattle home, and his father had come in from his day's work. The family would sit round the fire and eat, while the little ones nodded sleepily, and then they'd talk, mulling over the events of the day, telling stories, discussing the next visit to the market. And Mamo, when he was able to sit up, would be drawn into the circle. He'd sit with them, like a guest, eating what they ate, laughing when they laughed. His eyes would go from one face to the next, watching, almost breathless with love, as the firelight flickered on their coppery skin. On the 12th evening, as the fire died down and Johannes' mother stood up and yawned, ready to unroll the bed mats and lie down to sleep, Johannes' father came over to Mamo and sat down beside him. He put a hand on Mamo's knee. "You are well now," he said. A cold hand seemed to tighten around Mamo's heart. He said nothing. "Tomorrow you must go back." Mamo squeezed his eyes shut as if to keep out what the man was saying. "I know it's hard for you, but you can't stay here any longer." "I can't go. Please keep me here with you." Mamo's sharp cry made Johannes and his mother look round. Then they turned away again. "You know I can't do that." The man hesitated. "Try to understand your master. He lost his eldest son last year. Did you know that?" Mamo shook his head. "The boy was only a year older than you, and a great help to his father. His death's made him feel bitter. He's had bad luck since then too. Flooded fields, a fire in his grain store. He does his best." "They'll kill me if I go back?" Mamo said hoarsely. "They hate me, especially Tesfaye." "Tesfaye misses his brother. He can't bear to see another boy in his place." Mamo clenched his fists. "Please," he said. "Please." Johannes' father picked up the end of Mamo's shama and tucked it round his shoulders. "Go to sleep," he said. "You'll feel better about it in the morning." But in the morning Mamo woke with a lump as heavy as a stone in his chest. He couldn't even eat the breakfast he was offered. Choked with tears, he muttered a few incoherent words of thanks and walked stiffly away out of the compound, feeling more miserable with every step he took. He saw the farmer's cattle straggling down the hill towards the river from a long way away, and recognised Tesfaye, who was herding them. His pulse quickening with fear and anger, he made himself walk on. They met where the lane from the homestead joined the broader path at the bottom of the hill. Mamo, braced for angry words, for insults and flying stones, was taken aback by the nervous, almost guilty look in Tesfaye's eyes. "Are you all right now, then?" he said, looking away. "Yeah." "Good, then I'll get off to school. Here, take my stick if you like." He handed his stick almost politely to Mamo and ran back home to put on his uniform and fetch his books. The day was not unbearable. Falling into the old routine with Hilo and Johannes, Mamo could put out of his mind for quite long periods of time the dread of returning to the farmer and the hated compound of his master. When the shadows began to lengthen, he lingered by the stream for as long as possible, knowing that there would be only hostile faces and the most meagre supper waiting for him when he'd driven the cattle home. At last he could put it off no longer. He almost missed the difficult black cow, who had always veered off the path, as he drove the others round the corner of the lane. He looked up when he came to the last stretch, and his heart gave a painful thump as he saw that the farmer was standing by the gate of the compound, his arms draped over the stick across his shoulders, waiting for him. He reached the top and shepherded the cows inside, then cried out as the man's finger and thumb caught his ear in a vicious grip and yanked him down to his knees. "Any more trouble from you, one more thing goes wrong, and I'll kill you, do you hear? And there'll be no more whining off to the neighbours, making a fool of me. Stay away from them, or you'll really know what it feels like." He let go of Mamo's ear, went into the house and shut the door, leaving Mamo outside in the gathering cold and darkness. The door opened a few times during the evening. Once or twice Tesfaye came out. He seemed about to speak to Mamo, but never did. The girl brought him a corn on the cob for his supper and a glass of water. The woman went round behind the house to fetch something and went back inside without speaking to him. Huddled in his shama under the eaves of the cowshed, Mamo saw himself suddenly as if from outside, a pathetic figure, lonely in a place he hated with people who despised him. Anything, any place in the world is better than this, he thought. So why do I stay? The question came back twice, 3 times, and suddenly the answer was there. I won't stay, I'll go away. He felt light-headed with excitement. Before he'd been afraid of running away in case, out there in the unknown countryside, he might starve to death before he could find a way home to Addis Ababa. He wasn't afraid of death anymore. Death was a simple thing, just the separation of the soul from the body. It wouldn't matter if he died. I'll go tonight, he thought, now. He was about to jump to his feet and run out of the compound, but caution held him back. The farmer would come after him. He paid out money. He wouldn't want to lose out on his investment. He forced himself to sit and wait until the intermittent conversation in the house stopped. Then he crept towards the compound gate and opened it. Who's there? What are you doing? The farmer called out sharply from inside the house. Mamo's blood seemed to curdle. Nothing, going for a pee, he called back. He waited for a few moments and shut the gate again. Then he went to the cowshed and opened and shut the door. The farmer would think he'd gone inside to bed. He stood motionless for 10 long minutes until he heard loud, regular snores coming from the house. Then, much more cautiously, he opened the compound gate, slipped outside. And then he was off, running as if a demon was after him, down the lane and away. As he ran, he tried to pick out, in the light of the rising moon, the long pale track that would take him from his hated place to the road, which in turn would lead to Addis Ababa.